Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Authors on Mission podcast, where we're going to explore transformative leadership in the form of the written word. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission, and today we're going to be talking to Ed Gurowitz, who has spent over 4 decades shaping the landscape of inclusive leadership. He brings a unique blend of psychology, neuroscience, and practical business experience to the conversation about diversity and inclusion. He is the founding partner of Inclusionary Leadership Group and the Better Man Conferences, and is the past chair of the Mankind Project USA. He's been the forefront engaging man as allies in creating a workplace culture of true partnership and inclusion. And he has a new book out. The newest book is Inclusion, the Role of Leadership, which challenges to think about our approach and to organizational culture and change. So, without further ado, we're going to explore his journey from clinical psychology to corporate consultation and discover how brain science informs leadership and how the written word in his book was able to spread his knowledge. So, without further ado, welcome, Dr. Gurowitz. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Danielle. It's good to be here. Appreciate your having me.
Yeah, we're really grateful. I was actually, doing a bunch of research about you and your work. And honestly, I think that everything you have in here and your book and the whole idea of inclusive leadership, I think it's something that not a lot of people consider when it comes to leadership. You know what I mean? In terms of being empathetic and really considering the needs of everybody on your team. So all in all, I think your studies really do drive impact, and I'm looking forward to, kind of diving deep more into that with you today.
Great.
So yeah, one thing I'd like to start off with today is the fact that, your work throughout the many years that you've been doing this, it spans from neuroscience and leadership to many other different fields. So I guess I'm kind of curious to start, how do you balance your knowledge from all these different areas that you're such an expert on? And how did you use that to create your book? Was it difficult to organize all your thoughts? Did you kind of come naturally to you? What was it like as you were planning it out?
Good question. Well, first of all, I don't think it's a question of balance. It's really a question of integration. As you mentioned, I'm a psychologist by training. My original training was in what today is called neuroscience. In those days, we just called it brain research. And went from there into clinical psychology, and from there into organizational, really looking for where could I make the biggest difference in terms of how people find satisfaction, productivity, etc. in their lives. You'll have seen this in the book. The 3 areas blend together very well, especially the neuroscience and the psychology, because brain function is really at the heart of what drives us as human beings. It's both kind of the hero of the story and also the villain. And when it comes to inclusion, it's very much the villain, because our brains are really wired to keep us in the illusion of separateness and otherness being a bad thing, rather than looking to see what are the various contributions that other people can make.
Right, and I can see, how your passion derives from that, just even going back to your childhood. I kind of flipped through the book a little bit, and right in the forward, you talk about very powerful childhood memory about fairness and warm beds, and, that early awareness of inequality. I feel like that probably shaped your approach to all of this, and perhaps maybe even why you got into the field. Am I correct in assuming that?
Absolutely. Absolutely correct.
Let's hear a little bit more about that then.
Well, that memory, like with most memories, it's hard to know how much of it is really a memory and how much of it is a metaphor. But basically, for those who haven't read the book, I was a young kid. I was probably 7 or 8. I don't remember, maybe 10. And my father was putting me to bed at night and kind of tucking me in. It was this cold, stormy night in upstate New York. And I said something like, "Isn't it too bad that every kid doesn't have a warm place to sleep like this?" And my father said, "Well, yeah, but there's nothing you can do about it." And my response to that was, "Oh yeah, I'll show you." And that really was the seed, or an example of the seed that planted a lifelong commitment to fairness and equality and equity. And then as I went to college back in the 60s, in the heyday of the civil rights movement, that became a place where I could focus there at the women's movement, et cetera, and brought in the politics of it as well as the psychology of it. So yeah, I don't remember if I talk about this in this book. I do in my next book about core values. And a core value is a value you hold that if you didn't have that value, it wouldn't be you. You'd be somebody entirely different. And fairness and justice and equality are a core value for me.
Understood. Yeah, well, why we think about that? You have clear distinctions between all three of those, equality, fairness, justice. Going back to your book, when I was looking through it, you had a baseball game. Fence is like kind of an analogy for that. I wonder if you can kind of explain that, because for me, when I think about it, they seem really similar in a way, but you have very clear definitions for each of those.
Right. Well, equality is essentially, I'm going to say legislative, but with a small L. So it might be company policy, it might be municipal policy, it might be government policy. It's being equal in rights and value to all others in a specific group. Equity has to do with how people are treated. That's where justice and fairness come in. Not only status-wise they're equal, but they're treated with justice and fairness. And then inclusion or allyship is when the barriers are removed and people are working together as partners, not regardless of differences, but including differences, maximizing the value of differences. So if you see things one way and I see things another way, rather than arguing about who's right or some power dynamic determining that I'm right because I'm your boss, instead, we really explore each other's point of view and find where we can synergize those points of view so that we both end up being smarter. They say that equality is a seat at the table, equity is having your voice be heard, and inclusion or belonging is having your contribution valued and included in making a difference. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. But I guess now I'm wondering, and almost another question that I wrote up for you, but a little bit different now that I'm hearing your explanation of it all. As you're sharing these ideas with others and trying to help other companies follow these guidelines, do you ever encounter resistance from that? Like anybody who thinks that, perhaps maybe it's not needed or anything like that? Or do most people agree with you? I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward, but something tells me not everybody's as willing.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, if there was no resistance, I'd be out of a job. Really, I don't like calling it resistance. It shows up that way, but there's an ingrained way of thinking we have. Now, I work mostly with men for a couple of reasons. One is, for the same reason Willie Sutton robbed banks. They asked him why he robbed banks. He said, that's where the money is. Well, men are where the power is. If my work and the work of my colleagues is going to make a difference in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's got to make a difference with men. And what I find with men is you could call it resistance, but it's really unexamined. So for example, one of the hot buttons with people in this area is privilege. You talk about privilege, especially in a corporate environment, and what people say initially, especially men, is, I'm not privileged, I work for everything I got. But when you take them on a deeper dive into that and they see, the biases in the culture, in the system toward favoring white men of a certain age, etc. Now, do women have certain privilege? Yes. Do black people have certain privilege? Yes, but not nearly on the same scale. So rather than treat it as resistance, I want to honor it and have people see that while on the one hand, privilege is a fact, on the other hand, you didn't do anything. It's not your fault. There's nothing to be ashamed of. You were like a goldfish is born into water. You were born into privilege. And you can choose to use that privilege to leverage change for good, to use the power that's an accident of birth, as I say in the book, to bring others into the fold, into the inner circle of people who are making a difference, who are influencing, who are included in leadership. It's not about you shouldn't have privilege or you should have privilege or you deserve it or you don't deserve it. It's simply a fact. It's like having brown hair. If you're a white man, particularly, there's certain privilege you have. And the question isn't, should you have it? The question is, how are you going to use it?
Understood. Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting then, because you don't see it as a negative thing. You see it as something that almost like another challenge for you to overtake and sort of like just show us other people, relay your message. And then I guess in a way, there's only so much you can do after a certain point to see whether or not they adopt the practices. But, that's, I guess, why you have such compelling points to make in your book, because now you can share that book with others. And as they read it, they might, see them, the case studies, the examples, the evidence, and then, going from there, it just adds more credibility to what you write. It's something I tell our listeners all the time, right? You have an idea, you have a theory that works, but if you don't explain it well in your book, if you don't drive your case home, that resistance that you see as like a great opportunity, other people might just ends up being detrimental. So that's, I guess
exactly
a great point for what you did in your book, is that people are able to.
And I would say this as well, Danielle. The opposite of resistance is not compliance. The opposite of resistance is apathy. People who resist are committed. They need to see the facts of the matter. They need to mobilize their commitment and take action. But the people I worry about are not the ones who resist. They're the ones who sit back with their arms folded and don't engage. It's that apathy that do more to maintain the negative aspect of the status quo than resistance will.
Understood. Okay. Yeah. So it's about getting people to care about your message then, right? To want to know more, or to like recognize that it's out there.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now that you have this book out, right? I'm wondering, there was one point in life when this book wasn't on the shelves. What made you decide to take what you're doing, compile it all up, and put it on the pages of the book? Was there a certain moment that inspired you to go ahead and kind of take this leap and write a book, or something you've always wanted to do?
Well, this is my second book, and I've got a third one coming out in January. But it had been a long time since my first book, which was on memory substrates in the brain. The thing I noticed when I started doing this work, and this goes back to 10 years, 12 years or so, working in different companies, working with a lot of very active women. There's a woman called Rayona Sharpnack who had a company, she's mostly retired now, but she had a company called Institute for Women's Leadership. Mm-hmm. And I did a lot of work with her because she would go into companies and do trainings for women in being more effective leaders. And she began to get feedback like, well, what about the men? And she asked me and other colleagues to come in and do some work with the men in these companies. And as I did that, and it was trial and error. I didn't know how to do it other than having had a pretty much career-long experience doing work on leadership, but not with a focus on, at that time, gender, later gender, race, etc. I saw that there were some principles that work. I say in the book that there's three cases for inclusion: the business case, the personal case, and the moral case. Well, with men, you have to lead with the business case. Many people at that time who were doing work in the DEI space were leading with either the moral case or the personal case. Well, those are important. The personal cases, think about your wife, your daughters, your sister, your mother, and how you would want them treated. The moral case is everybody pretty much agrees that it's wrong to discriminate and to pay women less than men, etc. But the business case, there's just a ton of data, and I spend a couple of chapters in the book reviewing this, that shows that companies that practice inclusion and belonging have higher productivity, higher profitability, better engagement on the part of employees. Generally, it's good business. So when I realized that there were principles in how to bring this message into corporations, that was kind of my motivation for writing the book. I wanted to get it down. I wanted to share it because obviously I have a limited reach, but the book extends that reach, and the feedback I've gotten on it is people find it useful. So that makes me happy.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's like you found a need that had to be filled. You knew that if you got this message out, that you'd be able to provide that to these people, and also just answer their questions and find a way to reach just a broader audience in general. So I see
Precisely.
why, kind of branching off of that. Let's see. I mean, you've done so many other things aside from writing your book. But one more question before we move along from that. I'm just curious. So has anybody ever reached out to you? That book's been out there. Have they come to you, maybe emails or, maybe letters talking about how reading your book has influenced them or changed their lives? Any positive results, basically? Any fun examples to share?
I've had some very kind feedback from people, particularly in corporate work that I've done where we do the work face to face, they read the book and see major shifts, both personally in their relationship at home, but also in their relationships at work, where all of a sudden, as I said, people are more engaged, they're more contributive, and there's a lot less, I'm not going to say there's less conflict, there's more productive conflict, because I don't think conflict's a bad thing at work. But it can be productive or it can be destructive. And if people follow the principles and the ideas, and I'm not the only one talking about this, obviously, there's a lot of people working in the field now, and in the past 10 years, the field has expanded dramatically, that people do seem to find that it makes a difference. So I'm very, very gratified by that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something all of our listeners can really benefit from, and they love to hear because, our people are business leaders, entrepreneurs, or just anybody with an idea wanting to be shared. And, if they probably are inspired by knowing that what you have done and by having that book out there, it gives them hope because that means that they can do the same thing, but it's not easy to do. A lot of people just take the idea and they sometimes just put it off and they put it off and they put it off. You were able to actually put it into words and go ahead and write that. So, based on that, I'm wondering, did you face any challenges going into this? Did you have a team helping you? Or was it solely just a matter of dedication, like sitting down for 15 minutes a day and writing? What was it like, the whole process?
There's a lot of people who have worked with me along the way and taught me a great deal. I mentioned Rayona Sharpnack. Certainly my work with the Mankind Project, privilege of co-founding a conference called the Better Man Conference that went on for several years, where we got to develop some of this material and interact with a whole lot of people. We did it in San Francisco, New York, New Jersey for several years running. The main thing, first of all, none of it's rocket science. As you'll see in the book, it's the concepts are simple. I had a friend once who used to say that common sense is easy, but it's not common practice. So one of the key things is that just reading the book, for example, by itself isn't going to make any difference or much difference. It's got to be put into practice, and that's what a lot of our workshops and our corporate work is about. The other thing that's worth noting is that there's been recently, in the last year or so, the beginnings of a backlash against DEI efforts, and to the point where, Walmart, who are the largest private employer in the United States, have rolled back their DEI efforts, and that's very disturbing. And they're not the only one. And I think is a reflection to a great deal of the political climate and the social climate in the country right now. And so, for myself and for other people who are working in this area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, both men and women. Jennifer Brown, who's written excellent books on inclusive leadership, and others, we got to keep working. We can't give up the good fight.
Can't give up the good fight. I like that. It's just like an overarching thing to remember that you have a passion, you have to keep following that passion. And what are you doing if you're not following it? You're not trying to just break down those walls.
Well said.
Now, you mentioned you're writing another book in January. Do you want to share a little bit about that? Where can we be on the lookout for it, and what's it going to be about?
Well, it's with the publisher now, getting the final edit. It should be out in January, at least on Kindle. I'm hoping that it'll be out in hard copy in January as well. Mm-hmm. The book is called Transformation from Potential to Practice. I've been working in the area of transformational leadership and individual transformation for most of my career, certainly going back to the late 70s. And there are an awful lot of very good programs and books around that are kind of methodology dependent. This is how you do transformation. Well, what I realized, having worked with a lot of the people that wrote those books and having used their methodology with clients I was working with them, I realized the whole notion of personal or organizational transformation. And by that, I mean shifting your perspective from being acted upon by circumstances, whether it's personal circumstances, political circumstances, organizational circumstances, to use a term that unfortunately isn't popular, it's being a victim of circumstances. To move from that, to shift your perspective from that to being able to deal with life as it is without adding judgments and fear and anger and all that. To live a commitment or purpose-driven life, that's what I mean by transformation. And it works as well for organizations as it does for individuals, but it's not methodology dependent. So what I've done in the new book is I've laid out the principles of personal and organizational transformation without regard to methodology. The one method that's critical, and I mentioned earlier with regard to inclusion, is having a clear commitment or purpose, practicing over time in community. It's not something you go, I suppose, I'm told if you go live in a cave, you can transform or get enlightened. Not for me. For me, if it's not happening in community, if it's not affecting other people, it isn't as valuable. So that's the one thing I say across all the methodologies that you have to include is practice over time and community. And I talk about how to do that. I talk about some of the pitfalls along the way, both for organizations and individuals. On transformation is the culmination of 60 years of work in the field, and it's my legacy. I'm very proud of it, and I hope it'll make the kind of difference that I intend it to make. But yeah, look for, and I'll certainly let you know, Danielle, so you can let your listeners know when it comes out in January, and hopefully you'll have me back to talk about it.
Oh, we would love that, because especially now that we know like the premise of it and a little bit about you and your theories. Our listeners right now are probably like, if you're not already, everybody, start putting that into your calendar. But drawing on what you said before, though, it's really more so about your legacy over promotion. I like that you said that a lot, because a lot of our listeners, and I was just talking to another guest who made the great point that as much as we want ROI and increased business and speaking engagements, our book at the end of the day is our legacy. It's about, leaving something behind for everybody. So.
Exactly right. Exactly. And I will say this, the work I'm talking about, I've done it all over the world. The only continent I haven't worked on is Antarctica. And, just because penguins are just not up for it. But
that just needs something like that. A little bit too cold to turn the pages of a book.
That's the thing. Exactly. But I just got back, in fact, from engagement in Southern Africa with the company I've worked with for a couple of years now, and they're seeing real results and seeing the organization turn around in the direction of collaboration, communication, satisfaction, employee engagement, all the stuff we've been talking about. So if you have listeners in other countries, there used to be a show called Have Tux, Will Travel. Well, I don't have a tux anymore, but I will travel.
Yeah, I mean, coming from somebody who also loves to travel, I spent the whole past summer just like bouncing around Europe and Asia. So we probably have to have you back on, not just to talk about your book when it comes out, but also talk about what it's like to travel around and talk about your book and hear the responses from different cultures. I feel like that might be a very interesting show to talk about.
I would love to do that, Danielle.
Yeah, I'm sure lots of different ways to frame your message depending on who your audience is too. So
fabulous.
Topic. I know, unfortunately, you did mention that you do have to head off to another meeting after this, but to all of our listeners out there, Ed, I would love to have you back on to wrap up this conversation sometime, promote the book once it's out, talk about all these other experiences. So,
all you got to do is ask.
Yeah. Well, I ask. I'll message you.
I accept.
Well, with that, listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another Authors on Mission podcast. Ed here has just so many amazing ideas that can benefit everybody. It's been a very enlightening conversation, and I think we learned a lot about gender partnership, inclusionary leadership, of course the neuroscience, which we could dive more into next time. But all in all of this gives us powerful tools for getting more effective and equal workplaces, which is something very important, especially in this day and age. So remember, as he emphasized, true inclusion goes beyond metrics. It's about creating the environments where different perspectives aren't just present, but valued. So again, look for his book right now, Inclusion, and coming out in January, a whole new book for you to check out. And in the meantime, again, thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners, if you found value in this conversation, please check out Ed's website. Where can they find you?
On LinkedIn. Just
on LinkedIn.
I'm working on a new website when the book comes out, but for now, I'm on LinkedIn.
All right, look him up on LinkedIn and be ready for the book release. And until next time, everybody, keep leading with inclusion in mind, keep inspiring, and keep writing. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. And this is Ed Gurowitz, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody. As we close another inspiring episode, remember, every best-selling author was once just a person with a story to tell. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, inviting you to write the next chapter of your success story at authorsonmission.com. Your audience is waiting, your wisdom is ready, and your book is next.